Her problems weren't bad enough to require rehab. Sure, she was drinking just about every single night, but was still getting promoted at work. Her relationships were fine, and she wasn't getting into legal trouble. Yet my next guest, Marci Rossi, eventually came to realize that life without alcohol was not only possible, but indefinitely more joyful and fulfilling than she could have ever imagined. Welcome to the Sober Living Stories podcast. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of sobriety. We shine a spotlight on individuals who have faced the challenges of alcoholism and addiction and are today living out their best lives sober. Each guest has experienced incredible transformation and are here to share their story with you. I'm Jessica Stepanovic, your host. Join me each week as guests from all walks of life share their stories to inspire and provide hope to those who need it most. Welcome to another episode of the Sober Living Stories podcast. Meet Marci Rossi. She's a 4-time certified coach dedicated to empowering women to redefine their relationship with alcohol and achieve success in their lives. Listen in today as she shares part of her personal story about how she got from there to here. Hey, Marci, how are you? Thank you so much for being on the show today.
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to hear. What intrigued me about your story is the very beginning of you not requiring the normal characteristics of somebody who suffers from the disease of alcoholism. That's a self-diagnosed, but you said, you didn't require rehab. There was no changes in your work life. You were still getting promoted. Your relationships were okay, but you decided anyway to pursue a life without alcohol and had really incredible results. So take us from as far back as you want to go to the present day of why you're serving women today.
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly. So let me just preface this by saying that I had absolutely no idea that this was where I was going to end up. This was not something that has been on my plan, from the beginning. Quitting drinking in general was something that was just brand new to me because I have always kind of seen alcohol as like a necessary component of life, right? So I'm Italian by heritage, and growing up, my grandfather made his own wine, grew his own grapes, made his own wine. And so, as kids, they would put kind of like a drop in our wine glass and then fill it up with Sprite. So it was basically this like light pink liquid, just to kind of give us a taste of alcohol. I guess the idea was to kind of acclimate ourselves to alcohol so that we would grow to appreciate the taste. And I can remember just being terrible, even just like a little drop in the glass was just, it changed the Sprite. You ruined the Sprite, right? But at the same time, we felt so grown up, right? So here were the adults and they're having their wine, and even some of the adults would mix it with Sprite. So I felt like we were kind of part of the club, and I was like the middle-aged cousin. And so I had several that were older than me, and it made me feel more like I was fitting in with that. So that was kind of my first taste of alcohol. But I don't normally think of that when I think about starting drinking. I think about being 16, being the straight A student, the kid who never got in trouble. My brothers were a lot more of a handful. They struggled in school, they struggled behaviorally. And so this was kind of my way to rebel. I was doing everything right, and this was kind of my secret way to rebel. And so, my friends and I would sneak drinks from our parents' liquor cabinets, and I would, top it back off with water and blame it on my brothers if I ever got in trouble. And who wouldn't believe me, right? Because I was a straight A student, never got in trouble. So it wasn't that we were drinking that often. Obviously, we couldn't just go out and buy alcohol from the store or anywhere. I would just kind of do it every once in a while. We got bored, teenagers are looking for some excitement in their life. And then I went to college. I went to one of the most Greek universities in the country, and it was also one of the most affluent universities in the country. So party culture was very strong, and they had a lot of money to have these kinds of insane parties, right? So there were fraternities that would rent charter buses that would drive kids to and from the bar so that you wouldn't have to take an Uber or whatever. So it made drinking just really easy to do. There was alcohol everywhere. You wouldn't have to worry about getting home, and it was just part of the culture there. So I would be drinking, Thursday through Sunday, but that's what everybody else was doing, right? Everybody was drinking this much. So I wasn't any different. It wasn't until I went to study abroad in my junior year in Australia, which was really incredible, that it was also the first time in my life that I experienced depression. So it got to the point where I was hiding a box of wine under my desk and I was drinking. I would say all day, every day. What I was doing was I was going to class, but then when I was back at home, I was drinking, and I kept it really hidden. And this is a theme that kind of went throughout my life. I knew that there was a problem. I knew it wasn't normal to drink boxed wine all day, every day while watching, I think, Dawson's Creek at the time. Uh, but I didn't know how else to cope with this, right? I was in a foreign country. I didn't have my doctors. I didn't have medication. Like, this was just me trying to take care of myself. And it was the best I could do at the time. So that lasted for a little while. When I got back to the States, I got on some antidepressants and was able to kind of move that drinking level back up to normal, quote unquote, right? So, Fridays and Saturdays, occasionally another night during the week, but just what seemed to me like what everybody else was doing. And then again, I had a couple other bouts of depression, and the same thing would happen where I would be using alcohol all day, every day, just to cope, just to make the time pass, to make it all bearable. It wasn't, when I say bearable, it wasn't making things better. It was just making me care less that they weren't better. Right. So it wasn't
Such a
solving
good
my
point.
problems. Yeah. It's that's the thing is, and I knew this. The thing is, it's so funny when we have these beliefs and we know this is not working for us, and yet we do it anyway. It was just the best tools that I had. And for me, caring less about the pain was better than dealing with the pain. Everything else felt too hard, which is just it was just a false belief that I had in my head. Like, I knew I love to dive into health and research and this sort of thing. So I knew that alcohol wasn't making my depression better, and in fact was probably making it worse. But I just didn't know what else to do. It just felt like the only answer at the time. Like, antidepressants take a long time to work, like exercise is hard when you feel like crap, when you have no energy. Like, everything else felt impossible, and it takes almost no effort to drink, or at least that's the way I interpreted it. So again, it would skyrocket. Sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, you hit a couple of good points just then. You said like doing it by yourself. Like, I thought of the word isolation. Like, when we do something like that, it just kind of closes our world, right? And you use the word cope, and I too can relate to thinking that alcohol was helping my depression when in turn it was actually worsening it. But I didn't know that until I changed it.
Yeah, those are 2 points. Actually, I want to expand on both of those. I think that's really fantastic. You pointed those out. The isolation, for a lot of my life, I was living alone, so it was just me and my dog, and so I was very isolated. But alcohol made me more isolated. Right, I wasn't going to go drive somewhere after I was drinking. I was probably too tired and not feeling great. And obviously, it was a be against the law at some point for me to get out on the road at that point. So it kept me isolated. But even when I got married, even when I, was living full time with my husband, I was so embarrassed by how much I needed alcohol that I was hiding it. Right. So I was sneaking vodka into my sparkling water bottles, or hiding empty bottles in my dresser so that he wouldn't see them piling up in the recycling bin. Right. So I was, even living with someone, I was isolating myself further because I just felt so embarrassed that everybody else seemed to have it under control and that I couldn't. Like, I couldn't say no to this, and I was coping, but if you think about the word cope, it's to deal with successfully. I was not dealing successfully, right? Like, filling up your LaCroix sparkling water with vodka is not successfully dealing with the stress and the problems you had. But that is ultimately where I got, through these depressive episodes, I used alcohol more and more. And that's where I ended up. I was doing what I felt was coping, but I was not dealing with the problems, which meant they just built up, right? That was one of my biggest issues with alcohol, is that I wasn't solving any issues. It let me feel a little bit more relaxed in the present situation, but then I would be more anxious the next day. I didn't take any action on anything. So it wasn't until really a dry January that I actually recognized I had a problem. Like I was hiding things from other people. And in the turn, I was also hiding things from myself. Right. If other people didn't know about it, then it wasn't really a problem. If I was getting promoted at work, then it wasn't a problem. If I wasn't getting DUIs, my relationship with my husband was fantastic. My relationship with my friends was great. Like nobody knew I had a problem. So then I didn't have to admit that I had a problem. It wasn't until I tried a dry January and I ended up drinking 3 times that month, but they didn't count, right? Like, so one of those was just a really hard day at work. And one of those situations was a friend's birthday. So these things, they just didn't count, right? And I tried it year after year. And only 1 year, I was able to go all 31 days without drinking. And I was miserable. I was thinking about alcohol every single day for 31 days. I had a countdown on my phone until February 1st. Like I was obsessed. And that to me signaled that this is a problem. Something has to change here, right? This cannot be how I spend the rest of my life.
Well, you use that word obsessed, right?
Obsessed.
And they talk about it being like an obsession of your mind. And, they talk about that in different 12-step recovery programs that you aren't essentially a part of, but it being an obsession of your mind and then becoming like has to be completed out, once you start that craving or you have to finish it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and the more you try not to think about it, the more you're thinking about it, right? Like if I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to make it through. I was counting down those days until I can think about it in February. So I'm counting down until I can think about it again. It was a mess. But even then, alcohol had such a tie on my life that I was not ready to take action. It wasn't for about 10, 11 more months that I was able to say, okay, enough is enough. And I'll be honest, there wasn't like a big point that got me there. There wasn't this rock bottom moment that I think happens with a lot of people where I said, okay, I'm done with this. I've had some moments in my life from overdoing it that definitely should have been my rock bottom moment, but this wasn't it. I just got tired of it. I just was not willing to accept that this was my life anymore. I had these thoughts of like, this seriously cannot be all there is. Life can't be this boring. Like drinking every night at home is boring, like watching Netflix and binging Netflix and going to the bars weekend after weekend. This is boring stuff. There's just so much more out there, but I didn't have the energy. I was too stressed and anxious to go do any of these other things. And so I just reached a point that I just couldn't do it anymore. And I decided that I needed help. I had already tried for 5+ years on my own to try to control my drinking. I've set every rule in the book. I have broken every rule in the book. And so I knew that this was not going to work on my own and that I needed to get support. That was just the only way.
Where did you reach out to for support? What did
So
you find worked?
Well, I only tried one thing, and that's because nothing else made sense to me. So I wasn't going to go to rehab, right? I was succeeding at work. I was getting promotions. I wasn't in legal trouble. Like to lock myself away for $50,000 in 30 days just didn't seem like that was a proportional reaction to kind of where I was. And the AA model didn't appeal to me for a few reasons. One, I'm not a religious person. Another is that I take issue with the word alcoholic. It's not a word that the medical community uses. It's not a label that I wanted to assign to myself, right? For me, an alcoholic was a person who was, on the side of the road, drinking out of a paper bag, like really struggling. And that wasn't me. I was crushing it as long as you didn't look behind closed doors. So that was not a method that I wanted to go either. And it was actually an ad that I saw for a coaching program. I didn't know that coaching was a thing outside of like sports in high school. It wasn't something I was familiar with. And so I joined a group coaching program, and it was actually so transformational that I decided that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I quit my job. I started my company. This was within 5 months of the program, but within 3 months of the program, I had already decided this is what I was going to do. And then I took that leap a couple months later because it was just so incredible. I think my only issue with that program was that it was a group program, which is how a lot of support happens in this area, whether it is a 12-step program or rehab or coaching. It's often in a group. And I think groups can be fantastic, but they can be also very overwhelming if you're someone like me, where there's a lot of shame around your behavior. Right. I was hiding how much I was drinking because I was so embarrassed about how badly I needed this. And now I was about to walk into a virtual room, an online room, but regardless, and admit, hi, that I have a problem. And this was like overwhelming for me. So when I joined, I used like an alias at first and eventually got brave enough to use my own name, but it was too overwhelming to admit to like a huge group of people when I wasn't willing to admit it to myself. I wasn't willing to admit it to the person I had spent, the last 10 years with. Like I wasn't, it was a big leap. And so the only miss I think I had in that program was that I really wish it had been one-on-one. It would have been less of like a kind of a leaf off of a bridge for me. And so that's what I wanted to be able to offer to people, was that thing that I really wanted myself, was just to have one person in my corner helping me change how I feel about alcohol so that I could just stop thinking about it. I was so tired of thinking about it.
Yeah. So when you did enter that coaching, you got some support from a group, but was there like a leader? Was there somebody or was it just the group that kind of brought you out of your relationship with alcohol? How did you eventually put it down?
So there were a couple things. So there were several coaches in the group. It was a rather large group. So there were several coaches in the group that were available to us whenever we had questions. And it was actually, they were available every single day. It was also, and this is, I think, where that group aspect can be beneficial, but working with people who are struggling like I was, we are our own worst enemies, right? So we're constantly thinking about how we're terrible, and the things we say to ourselves are never the things we would say to other people. And so being in that group, what it allowed me to do was to show compassion for myself by learning to show compassion for other people, right? When they were struggling and saying, oh crap, I drank again, or this, that, and the other happened. It was so easy for me to say, like, it's okay, you can do it. But then to myself, it was like, what's wrong with you? Right. So learning that element of compassion by surrounding yourself with people who are in that same boat can be very beneficial. And I think the most important part of that program is the mindset work. So it was a combination of videos and working with coaches, but it is dismantling the beliefs that we have about alcohol so that there's no more temptation. Like one of the fears, let me say, that I had about joining a 12-step program is that this is something I'm going to have to work on for the rest of my life. Like once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. And I didn't want to do that. Like, I don't have time for this. I wanted to be done and move on with my life. And lo and behold, now I talk about alcohol for a living. But, the idea was this is not something I want to work on forever. And so by learning the true keys of behavior change, which is focusing on the thoughts and feelings that are leading to your behaviors first, makes that behavior change effortless. If you start with the behavior, you're using willpower. And I didn't want to use willpower. I don't have willpower. There's a reason there's no chocolate in my house. Like I don't have strong willpower when it comes to things that I think that I want. And so what I wanted to do was remove that thought that alcohol was going to help me. And that's what that program really, really worked on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And I mean, however, there's so many different ways to get to this result, right? And so you have to find what resonates, and what resonates for you. It may not resonate with somebody else or work for somebody else. So, it's great that you went in, you identified what didn't work for you, and then you kind of recreated that for other women. So when you were talking before about being depressed or, having this like mental obsession and such, I could just feel like, wow, this is going to be so freeing when she puts it down, because there's so much freedom to getting rid of a habit that is keeping us from living our real life, Yeah. And so what did that freedom feel like when you actually put alcohol down? Like, what did you start experiencing on the daily that was real positive or just really grabbed your attention? Like, this is something that I want, and I'm going to continue this.
That freedom for me really translated into self-confidence, which is something I've struggled with my whole life, right? I've struggled with my weight. I've struggled with being the not popular kid. So my self-confidence has always been kind of an issue for me. It's never really been my strong suit. And alcohol, I didn't realize this, but was making it worse, right? Every single time I told myself I need a drink to socialize, drinking makes me funnier, drinking makes me more confident. What I'm saying is I'm less than without it. I'm less confident. I'm less funny. I'm less sociable. I'm less than, full stop, right? And so by separating myself from alcohol, I realized that, you know what, I'm still pretty funny without alcohol. Like I am still the life of the party as long as that party ends by 10 p.m. Like I like my sleep. Right. So I was still that person that could be, that people appreciated being around. It wasn't the alcohol that they liked, it was me. And I did something hard, right? I did something in my life. To be frank, like I said, I was a straight A student. Academics came very easily to me, right? So I didn't really have to struggle in school, but changing something like this meant that I had to actually do the work. So I've kind of pushed away things that I'm not naturally good at. I don't play sports. I recognize my strengths, and I choose to focus on the things that I'm naturally good at. Changing my behavior here wasn't something I was naturally good at, but I did it. And that meant that I was so much more powerful than I ever gave myself credit for. Right. So the saying that I got from my group program, it's just something I use all the time, is just that I can do hard things. Like it didn't matter what that hard thing was. Like I have a phobia of the dentist, hate going to the dentist. And I could remember very vividly that first visit after I had, kind of taken this action towards alcohol. And I was like, you know what? I can do hard things. Like if I can change something that I never thought I would change, I was convinced I would be drinking, in the retirement center. Like alcohol was going to be part of my life forever. If I can do something like this, then yes, I can sit through a teeth cleaning or a filling or something. Like I can do hard things. And so that was that real freedom, is that, you know what? I don't need alcohol. I'm pretty darn awesome without it. And there's really no limit to what I can do. If I can change my life completely in a matter of months, then I mean, the sky's the limit at this point.
Let's take a moment to hear a recovery story from one of my sponsors. At the age of 25, recently married and a new father, Jack found himself in a Texas rehab facility detoxing. After 10 years of addiction, he was finally able to admit that it was time to get help. Not only did SoberLink allow him to be accountable and track his sobriety, SoberLink allowed Jack to prove to himself and others that he could make the change he had always hoped for. SoberLink is the portable sobriety tracker, taking the recovery world by storm. It has built-in facial recognition, sensors that detect cheating, and instant results sent to contacts. It's the #1 accountability tool for keeping yourself honest and rebuilding trust. Visit www.soberlink.com/sober-living and check out the show notes to click the link and receive $50 off your device today. Now back to our guest. Yeah, I think that transcends to like people in any kind of early sobriety. They're like, wow, and they want to drink, and their body's telling them to drink, but they don't want to. Yeah. And it's like, if you have to take it 5 minutes at a time, I recently didn't want to be going somewhere that I have to go. And I said, gosh, and a friend of mine said, hey, we can do anything for 2 hours. Yeah. And I thought, wow, yeah, I certainly can, and then that evidence, I think each day, did you find like each day alcohol free that you gained, it was like evidence that, wow, I can do this. I can watch Netflix without alcohol. I can go to this event without alcohol. I can go. Did you have any firsts that like you remember that were specific?
I remember going to a birthday party of a friend of mine. It's actually a friend of my husband. So I knew one person that was going to be there, and I knew I was going to be walking into a room of strangers. And I think one thing working on my relationship with alcohol really taught me is to approach things with curiosity, right? So alcohol, when I was drinking, I was using it blindly, right? I didn't stop to think, is this actually solving my problem? I just took it at face value that alcohol is going to make things better and just left it at that. And so by changing my relationship with alcohol, I also developed this aspect of curiosity. Like I actually, after I quit drinking, I did drink again when I was falling back into depression. And I was really mindful of it this time. Like, is it actually helping me? And so I drank for a couple of days and I knew it wasn't helping. And then I put down the bottle, put on my tennis shoes, and went for a walk and haven't picked it up since. I didn't need to get back on antidepressants. My depression kind of naturally coasted off after I built in that walking habit daily, but I didn't feel a need. I learned, I approached it with eyes wide open, right? So I did that same thing with that birthday party. It was like kind of turning it more into a game. Like, can I introduce myself to 5 people? Like, I wonder what I'm going to take away from this party just from going there, and the worst thing that can happen is that I have a boring time, right? Like, it's not going to kill me. So knowing those two things, like, yes, I can get through that. I can do anything for 2 hours, but also just approaching things eyes wide open. Like, I really wonder what it is that I can take out of this. Like, what benefit can I get today from going there? And, it just it's not, it just puts a different spin on things. It's not so where I was a type of person who kind of came to these conclusions and didn't challenge them. And so I've started to challenge that belief. If I assumed it was going to be a boring party, then that would actually happen, right? That attitude that I had going in there. If I assumed that there was going to be something I could learn from it, something I could benefit, then that would be my reality as well. So just really kind of changing how I approach everything is one of the results that I've seen.
Wow. And being professional and in that world, do you notice now that you're not drinking, do you notice things out in the world that are like alcohol free, like any trends, any things that you think are helpful to people who are trying to live an alcohol free lifestyle like yourself that are helpful when you're going to events, when you're attending things?
So I think this is actually one of the best times to start, let's say, exploring the sober curious movement, right? So when I tell people what I do, it's funny. A lot of people like to come to me to tell me like, oh, I haven't had a drink in this long, or oh, and they're just kind of proud of the changes that they've been making, just unasked. They're just unsolicited. And, now we have so many different options available to us, right? Like, this is gone are the days where your only non-alcoholic beverage was like a St. Pauli girl. There are tons of non-alcoholic beverages available if you want to still have something. Because, one of the reasons for me that I wanted a drink was I wanted a treat. I wanted to treat myself to something, right? I want to just have water or soda be my only two options. And when you look at that belief, I want to treat myself. I was saying I want to treat myself with poison. I want to treat myself with an enhanced risk of cancer. I want to treat myself with a raging headache and, the inability to stick to my diet, right? Like this is how I was treating myself. So what is a different treat? And I think there are so many fantastic options out there. Um, I've worked with people who are kind of afraid to try these beverages, thinking that it's going to, snowball into, if I have an alcoholic beer, then I'll want a regular beer even more. But what I've found has been the complete opposite, whereas before I would have a beer, two, three, four, six, 10, however many. But with that non-alcoholic beverage, because I am not intoxicating myself, one is enough. Like I've gotten what I needed. I've gotten that flavor. I've gotten that treat, and I have actually hydrated myself. And so I don't need more of that. So for me, it's actually a more freeing option to be able to expand the ways that you can treat yourself without that kind of snowballing thing. But there are just some really fantastic options these days, and new things are popping up on the market like every day. It's really incredible.
Yeah. So when people can you talk a little bit about your decision to help people achieve what you achieve? Like, how did you get into, hey, I'm going to do this for my professional work now, having put it down yourself?
Yeah, it was kind of a I don't want to say a light bulb moment. I don't know what the exact word is here, but I had just experienced such an incredible transformation. So when I joined that coaching program, it was a 3-month program. And the premise of the program was that we would all quit drinking latest like 60 days in. We would work on our beliefs first and then we work on the behavior. But I had invested. I am that perfectionist, go-getter, straight A student. I was like, I'm going to start on day one. And so day one, I decided I wasn't going to drink anymore while working on those beliefs and habits. And by the end of it, I mean, honestly, I would say less than 60 days in, my life had been so transformed. By the end of the 3 months, I was like, I have to pass this forward because I had a little bit of cravings and urges in the very beginning, but that thought work and that mindset work and working with the coaches to open my eyes to the beliefs that I didn't even realize I had changed me so quickly that I just didn't even realize this was possible. Right. So I love to read self-development books. I have a whole shelf actually to the left and in front of me. And the thing is, it wasn't taking action on it. This coaching was taking action. There is somebody right there in front of you that is helping you to see things that you've never, really thought about before. And so I was just really amazed at the kind of transformation that I was able to make. Like I said, I expected this was going to be my path for the rest of my life. And so I wanted to switch paths. I think one of the reasons that I was drinking so heavily was a lack of fulfillment in my career. I've changed careers several times. I'm a lawyer. I've worked at a big four accounting firm. I've spent 5 years in public libraries in the public sector. And there was always that underlying lack of fulfillment there. Like something was wrong. Everybody else seemed to have their careers figured out, from a young age. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. And everything just kind of missed. And while I loved a part of all of my jobs that I've done, I think what was really missing was kind of taking things under control and being responsible for the results that I have. Right. And so that was something that was really appealing to me in starting my own business. And I know I never would have done this, any business. I'm in coaching now, but I never would have started any business if I was still drinking, because alcohol kept me playing small. I was upset clearly in those other careers, but then I could just drink away that dissatisfaction instead of taking away or taking action on it. Right. And so,
Yes.
yeah, that was a big change for me. It was really just no longer being able to squash that dissatisfaction, and instead realizing that if I want things to change, I have to be the change.
Yeah. Excellent. I think you picked such a good career choice because your energy and like the inspiration that you push behind your words is so like on fire, like for what this is. So a lot of times, people have this transformation and then that becomes like the thing that brought them down becomes the thing that is their biggest success. It's like incredible because and that life experience, like that's invaluable. Like you're educated, you've gone to schooling, you've had professional careers, but like the life experience of having gone through something and come out like better is invaluable to pass on to people, I think. So I think what you're doing is incredible. Can you tell us a little bit about how to get in touch with you and what your work is? Is it because you had mentioned one-on-one, and I think like what I think is really important is that like you identified, hey, this isn't working for me. So futuristically, when you put yours together, you left that component out and focused on one-on-one. Do you have one-on-one and then a community where people can talk to one another, or do you just do coaching?
So right now I am just doing the one-on-one coaching. It's that component that, like you said, that was really missing or at least seemed to me like was really missing. It was something that I really wanted. I hated group work growing up in classes. Like, there's always that one person that wants to just talk the whole time or distract everybody. And this is focused attention on you, right? And that's what I wanted. I had stuff to do. I had goals. I don't have time to be messing around. And so I wanted to offer one-on-one coaching for the people that they just wanted focused attention so they can move forward at the best pace that they can have. So that's what I'm working on. I don't have the community aspect. I think there's a lot of communities out there. If you're just on Facebook, there's free communities. I don't need to build something for you to join. I think your world naturally broadens when you let go of alcohol. You can find all kinds of meetups and new friends. I have a new best friend that I met actually through this alcohol-free coaching certification. I mean, we are identical, and I never would have met her if I hadn't been on this new path. So your world is going to naturally expand anyway, but that private coaching, that initial hands-on unlimited support is what was really key for me. And so that's something, I mean, there's more on my website that you can learn more about it, which is just my name, marcirossi.com. But that is my meat and potatoes, or whatever they say, is that one-on-one aspect.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, like for your family life, like I know sometimes when people, like I had said, my previous guest spoke about being raised in an alcoholic home. So there was exposure. She did not become have any trouble with alcohol whatsoever. But the trickle down effect from having a dad who was alcoholic kind of, placed identities on each of the child. They kind of survived within their own house and then forged into adults, with that on them until they healed themselves. So was there anything like growing up that maybe exposed you to alcohol as a coping mechanism early, or is it something you just picked up along the way as an adult?
So I think it's a couple things. So I was exposed to alcohol really early as a child when, wine was just kind of something that you had for dinner. Yeah. My mom and her friends, when they would get together, they would have wine. And so that was how you socialized to me. It wasn't necessarily that my parents drank heavily. My dad very rarely drinks anything at all. And if he does, he gets an immediate headache and has to stop. But, for my mom, it was seeing her when she was with her girlfriends, having that wine, and me associating those as, this is how you socialize. There's also messages everywhere, right? Like everywhere it's telling us you have to drink. There's all the commercials. There's the mommy wine culture, which, seems so cute and fun, but really it's coming from the alcohol industry telling you that women need wine in order to cope. And there's I can go on a whole spiel on that. I'll save you that. But there's some really targeted messaging about women. But just going back to that family influence, I think it's important to recognize that we're in the driver's seat here, right? And just kind of taking responsibility for our own actions, because
Yes.
you gave the example of a person growing up whose dad's an alcoholic and they don't drink. And you could also do it the exact same way in the other direction, right? So, if you've given that model, you can say, well, my dad was an alcoholic. That's why I'm an alcoholic. That's what I learned. Or you could say, well, my dad was an alcoholic and I don't want to be anything like that. And that's why I never touch it. So in either case, you were exposed to this alcoholic right there in your family. And you can either use that as an excuse to continue behavior that you don't want to continue, or you can use that as a model of what you don't want in your life. And
Right.
either way, it's up to you. You get to make the choice here. And I think that's actually a really freeing proposition, that it doesn't matter what the messages are in society, what your friends are doing, what your parents did, XYZ. It's up to you. You get to
Yeah.
choose. It's up to you.
Yes. And like a lot of your, any exposure that you seem to have when you were younger was positive.
Yeah.
So, and then like as an adult, sure, there's messaging, there's marketing. And I think too, it's important to note, right? Alcohol affects everyone differently. So whether you're exposed to it in a positive way or a negative way, when you go to pick it up of age, it may hit you different. And so that may be a real depressant for some person. It may be, a real, what's the word I'm trying to find? Like when they drink, they're just completely outgoing and they're having such a great time, and then there's this crash. It's different for everyone. So if it's not working, you're saying you're in the driver's seat. You can get off anytime you want. Everyone's bottom is going to look different. It doesn't have to be like real low. You can still be getting promoted at work, still having thriving relationships, but individually like, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah. And you did, and you made a change. So I think your perspective on it is really empowering for people to take the initiative themselves and to not place blame or shame and live in that, but to say, hey, I can make a change. It's my choice, and then provide the support that's going to need. Because it does require, I think, help, especially if somebody's been doing it for a long time, or just depending on, from where you are with it. I think everybody's individually different. Like, you know what I mean? Like some people they talk about gray area drinking or sober curious. And some people talk about the true nature of being alcoholic, and I think all of those carry their own weight, and everybody has to come to what they want to on their own, Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that making that decision for yourself, right? You don't have to hit that rock bottom. You can just decide that you want something better for your life. And yes, it may require support. It may not. I know of people who decided to take that, dry January, and they felt so good that they just continued on with it. And that wasn't my experience. It was not feeling so great for that month that made me realize I needed to make a change. But it's scary to admit that you need help, especially for someone who is independent as I am, who, to say that I need help and that I have a problem is really uncomfortable. But so is knowing you have a problem and not doing anything about it. So is wasting your life away. It's also really uncomfortable to spend a day or two hungover. Like there's a lot of pain kind of on both sides, but knowing that you can choose to be uncomfortable for a short amount of time and then spend the rest of your life in freedom versus being uncomfortable forever and just trying to escape that discomfort, knowing that it's never going away. You're just putting a Band-Aid on pain. Those are kind of the two options there. So yes, it can be uncomfortable to ask for help, but it can also be really uncomfortable to spend the rest of your life not knowing that freedom that comes with never needing a drink, just simply not needing it, not thinking about it, not worrying about it, ever trying not to drink.
Yeah. Yeah. And excellent points. And also, you had talked about, you put the work in. And I think with anything, I mean, I know for myself, I don't know if you agree or not, but when if I put work into something, I'm less likely to give that up easily. If I didn't put work into my own sobriety, then if a temptation came, I would probably consider it or have an easy time, having it be like a proposition, like, yeah, okay, I'm going to walk away from this. But because I too put in a lot of work to my sobriety, there's no way I was going to walk away from it and do that all over again. Like, I mean, so there's really something to that personal growth work that's needed to just kind of get you to the next level so that you can live out the best version of yourself.
Yeah. I mean, and along that side of putting in the work is also investing in yourself, right? Like if I'm going to invest in something, I'm going to give it my all. I have those personal development books, like I said, on my bookshelf where I get them from the library. And if I get them from the library, it's free. And so I'm not as committed to it. But when I put my money where my mouth is and say, I'm going to try this and I'm going to invest whatever the investment is for whatever the project is, yes, I'm going to commit because I want to get my money's worth, right? Like I do not like throwing away my dollars. And so really having that investment in yourself is committing to taking action. I think that can be a really important factor as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything you can say to somebody to listeners before we end, who are considering becoming alcohol free, who are curious about that lifestyle, and just some encouragement for them to begin, because that's the difficult part, to take that step in that direction to see if it's for them?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing is that this isn't an either or situation. It's not like if you decide to try this that you can never drink again. I actually don't say myself that I'll never drink again. I think that's a promise that I can't predict the future. But what I can say is I drink as much or as little as I want. I don't want to drink right now. I have absolutely no desire. And that is an absolute possibility for anyone listening to this, that you can reach that point where you literally never think about alcohol. The other thing that I think is super crucial, that if you take one thing away from this that I want you to know, is that you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. I'm absolutely certain of this. There is no doubt in my mind that you can do hard things. I think the human spirit is incredible. And if we look for examples of people doing incredible things, then I guarantee you can do them too, no matter what situation you find yourself in. And that doesn't mean this has going to be necessarily a really hard thing. You may find it a lot easier. Like I've said, I've worked with people who they just approach this as an experiment and feel so good that they continue on. Or there's people on the other side of the spectrum like me, where it was kind of a struggle at first, and I've found complete freedom, but approaching it with curiosity, just seeing what happens. What happens if you go to a party and you don't drink? What happens if you spend a Friday night without alcohol? Like, you can just play with it. It doesn't have to be an either or, a lifelong decision. It's approaching things with curiosity and recognizing the strength that you truly have.
Good message. So where can listeners find you throughout the week, and also if they want to reach out?
So I am on social everywhere at Coach Marci Rossi. I know how to say my own name. And I'm on my website is marcirossi.com for anything. Reach out on Instagram. I love to chat with people. I love building new connections here. If you have any questions at all, I'm always free to chat.
Wow. Thank you so much for being on the show today. Excellent insights, completely inspirational. And I love the freedom you found in your own life.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning into the Sober Living Stories podcast. If you have been inspired, consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who could use hope in their lives. Remember to stay tuned for more inspiring stories in the episodes to come. To view our featured author of the month or to become a guest yourself, visit www.jessicastepanovic.com.